Buccaneer, the world's first under-the-radar aircraft concept. It's an example of British aircraft design at its best, and even today is still considered the finest low-level strike aircraft ever built. After more than 30 years operational service, it's now ready for retirement.
Well, there'll be a lot of tears in the eyes, I think, because a lot of people got a very soft spot for the aeroplane. It's a marvellous airframe. Still goes well, but again, it's getting old, and like all things, everything good thing has to come to an end.
Miss them. Very sad. It's just one of these things when you actually see them fly away. They're here one day, gone the next.
Oh, it'll be quite sad, really. The aircraft's been done a good job. It's proved itself over the years, and it's just the end of an era, really.
It's sad, but it's going out of service with me. The buck stops with me.
The early 1950s saw the Soviets embarking on the most massive build-up of naval power the world had ever witnessed, starting with their heavily armed Sverdlov-class heavy cruisers. Blackburn test pilot J.G. Bobby Burns recalls the concerns of the Sverdlov threat.
1953, you will remember, was the coronation year, and in that year naval review was held at Spithead and attended by a number of foreign vessels. Among them was the Russian cruiser Sverdlov, which set the cat among the naval pigeons quite considerably. They wanted to know more about it, and they hired, shall we say, a frogman called Buster Crabbe, who was, I think at that time, a retired naval officer. He was to go underneath this vessel as it was at anchor or moored and discover the secrets of its sonar and various things like that. I'm not in a position to say what they might be. He was unfortunately intercepted by some Russian frogmen, and that was the end of him, because his headless body was found washed up on the shores of the Solent some days, weeks later. Now, the naval staff had to think of a way of counteracting this Sverdlov threat. Obviously, they couldn't go into a big building program of other surface vessels. They had to use the resources that they then had. These were largely aircraft carriers, and from them they determined that they needed a new aircraft which would be capable of eliminating the Sverdlov class vessel.
Captain F.M.A. Torrance Spence, Deputy Head of the Air Warfare Division of the Naval Staff, was the man tasked with devising the specification of such an aircraft. It had to be capable of flying at 0.85 Mach at 200 feet, carry nuclear weapons and other stores, and have a radius of action of 400 nautical miles. The result was Requirement NA-39, issued in June 1952, and by February 1953, industry submissions started to land on the Ministry's desk. Hawker's submission, the P1108, was powered by 4 engines, but most of the projects were powered by either a pair of Avon or Sapphire engines and had large wing areas which could provide the lift necessary for carrier operations. The design selected was submitted by a company with historic links with the Navy, Blackburn Aircraft. Blackburns had been a major supplier of aircraft to the Navy for 40 years, and had included aeroplanes such as the Dart and Skua, which was the first British plane to shoot down an enemy aircraft in World War II. And also the Beverley Transporter for the Royal Air Force. The founder of the company, Robert Blackburn, was a contemporary of aviation greats like de Havilland and Handley Page, but an intense dislike for personal publicity meant that he never achieved the recognition he deserved. Brough in East Yorkshire was to be the home of the Buccaneer. The B-103, now called the NA-39 after the naval requirement, was a completely different project to anything previously undertaken. It was Blackburn's first jet aircraft, and new manufacturing techniques and systems had to be mastered. A major problem were the highly specialised large machine tools and milling machines that would be required. The only manufacturers of these machines were in the United States, and the fastest delivery offered to Blackburn was 2.5 years. With the aircraft contracted to make its first flight in 3 years' time, this was clearly unacceptable. In true indomitable style, Blackburn formed a team to produce their own specialised machine tools, and had them in operation within 11 months. To fly at high speed and low level in dense and turbulent air, the Buccaneer needed a tough airframe. It had been calculated that a conventional airframe would break up under these conditions in 150 hours. This aircraft was to have a life of 3,000 hours. That meant integral components had to be machined from solid billets of steel and aluminium. The price paid for the aircraft's durability was a potential loss of performance.
As the airplane was to be launched from an aircraft carrier, to some extent you could say that the takeoff problem was taken care of by the energy that the carrier could provide in the catapults. It was a catapult launch, of course. The problem was it was a big, heavy airplane, the biggest and heaviest the Royal Navy had had, and their carriers weren't all that big. Therefore, you had to effect a compromise between an airplane which was to fly in rough air very fast, and therefore wouldn't want a very big wing if it were to avoid fatigue problems attendant on the vibrations that were being transmitted to the structure, and the conflicting requirement of a large wing area, or a lot of lift to be more exact, that you required to land back on the carrier, or indeed come off the end of the carrier. Now the fashion at that time, and aerodynamics do go in fashions, variable sweep is one of them that we're going through at the moment. The elliptical wing of the Spitfire was another one. The fashion at the time, the hope for high lift was boundary layer blowing. This sounds rather complicated. It isn't very. What they did on the Buccaneer, and to an extent this had already been applied on such airplanes as the Scimitar, a previous naval airplane, and the American Lockheed F-104, was to blow air tapped off the engine over the landing flaps. This augmented the lift over these surfaces and therefore augmented the lift of the wing. A lot of you will have seen at Battle of Britain displays and flypasts at Buckingham Palace, the World War II Lancaster, Avro Lancaster. Now this airplane had an all-up weight, max overload weight they quoted, at 63,000 pounds. And it had a wing area of 1,300 square feet. The Buccaneer, just out of interest, had a maximum takeoff weight in its developed versions of 62,000 pounds, and it does it on a wing area of 500 square feet.
In March 1958, the prototype was covered in security shrouds and transported to RAE Bedford.
The contractual commitments of the Buccaneer were quite severe. They probably were severe for a lot of other airplanes too around the time, but the industry at the time had a rather poor record of missing targets for first flight, for example, and delivery to the service. The Buccaneer was, shall we say, unusual in this respect, that it actually hit the month in which it was projected to make its first flight. It only just did, actually, because April 58 was the month specified, and at the beginning of April everything looked good. It was down at RAE Bedford for its first flight, and it did a number of high-speed taxiing runs, which are normal for any first flight. In the course of these, unfortunately, a tyre blew because it got overheated through the braking, which was attendant on the high-speed taxi runs. As luck would have it, or bad luck would have it, the tyre was, where it burst, was pointing directly upwards into the wheel bay, and on top of that was the wing skin. And so it blew a hole in the wing skin, and everybody had very long faces. How to get it done inside the month? And, to cut a long story short again, they did. They repaired it, and it flew just at the end of the month.
On the 30th of April, in the capable hands of ex-Navy pilot Derek Whitehead, with Bernard Watson as observer, the Buccaneer took to the skies for the first time. Sadly, Robert Blackburn was never to see his most successful aircraft fly. He died in 1955. The aircraft climbed to 17,000 feet, and the flight lasted for 39 minutes. The first flight was an unparalleled success, and had taken place just 33 months after the contract had been placed. All the target dates had been met. It was a record of which Blackburns were justifiably proud. After the excitement of the first flight came the long periods of the flight trials. 20 development aircraft were produced over the following 3 years, during which time a wide range of tests were conducted in developing the flight envelope, as well as the avionics and weapon systems. Brough was unsuitable for operating aircraft, so trials took place at nearby Home on Spalding Moor. As flight trials continued in Britain, research was being carried out at NASA's Langley Research Center in Virginia under the US Mutual Weapons Development Program. In addition, the United States contributed some $13 million worth of flight test instrumentation. This was to be the last British aircraft to benefit from US aid. Simulated carrier trials at RAE Bedford formed a later part of the test program. In January 1960, deck landing trials were conducted on HMS Victorious, operating in the English Channel in a wide range of weather conditions. The first landing was made by Derek Whitehead. "30 takeoffs and landings were made over 3.5 days. Trials were also carried out in transferring the aircraft to and from the hangar deck. With the nose folded and the air brake opened, the overall length was reduced by 12 feet, and the aircraft still only cleared the carrier structure by a bare 2 inches. Development team engineer Jack Pearson was closely involved in the carrier trials.
The carrier qualification trials were a critical part of the development program, and this was very much a highly skilled operation on behalf of the pilot in particular. The catapult launch technique at that time had not been fully developed, and it involved rotation of the aircraft immediately following leaving the launch stroke, which was a critical manoeuvre at a critical part of the flight envelope. And at high weights where the acceleration rates were very, very low indeed, that lasted for quite a number of seconds before we got up to flying speed. The launches were done down to a safe minimum launch, and that was qualified by a height drop of no more than 15 feet and a safe acceleration away from that. So that's very much a critical part of the envelope for Buccaneer. At the other end of the scale, the recovery operation again was very highly skilled. The Buccaneer was a stable aircraft on the flight path. We came down a 3-degree flight path onto the deck, Perhaps the most exciting bit of the recovery was if you missed the wire and had to bolt. The Buccaneer had fairly limited performance, and particularly on single engine it was fairly exciting to go round.
July 1962, and 801 Squadron arrived at Lossiemouth to become the first operational squadron. A work-up period followed before they were to leave for the Ark Royal in February 1963. Chuck Giles was a senior pilot of 801 Squadron, later to lead 800 Squadron.
I'd been flying scimitars mostly before the Buccaneer, very fast aircraft, very overpowered. So the Buccaneer Mark I was a bit of a shock in some ways. It was very underpowered, particularly on the one engine. On the other hand, it was a lovely aircraft to fly and particularly good in the landing circuit, which of course is very important for a naval aircraft. Landing on board a carrier in a fixed-wing aircraft is really very different to landing on a runway. You have got to be bang on for speed. If you're too fast, you run the danger of pulling the wire out. If you're too slow, you run the danger of having too much attitude on the aircraft, and the hook may actually foul the stern of the carrier before you get to the wires. There's only a few feet safety clearance. The other thing, of course, is you've got to be accurately lined up with the centre line. If you're not, you could go over the side in one direction, or you could hit the deck park and the island of the carrier in the other. So it does take a rather a lot more concentration than landing at an airfield.
The lack of thrust of the Gyron Junior engines of the Buccaneer Mark I threatened the operational career of the aircraft. Rolls-Royce had been developing an engine for the de Havilland DH-121 airliner, and in a scaled-down version was to provide the extra thrust the Navy had been seeking. With a stroke of good fortune, the aircraft needed little modification. The new engines, called the Spey, were installed, creating the Buccaneer Mark II. Each Spey developed a little over 11,000 pounds of static thrust, increasing range by 600 miles and doubling the weapons load to 16,000 pounds. The Buccaneer was now a truly effective long-range strike weapons system.
Okay, standard climb. Looks as though we've got a wind from the west. About 19 knots. It's a bit lower than the Met reckoned. Do you want me to hold up? Negative. Leveling out. Okay, come port 040, wind 290, 38. Fuel looks okay. 220, 70. That's the enemy radar. Down you go. Okay, standard under the low descent. Fine. Passing 25,000. You've got the altimeter setting, haven't you? Yep, 1009, isn't it? That's it. Passing 1,000 feet. Check. Okay, low levels now. Increasing. Roger. Come starboard. 045. Steady, 045. I've got the landfall. Starboard, 047. Roger, 047. Visual. Okay, I see the lakes. I've got the target. Here we go. Bomb selected. Roger. The dive was about right. Seemed quite reasonable. We'll have to horse it around a bit in here. Okay then. Back down the fjord.
The Soviet naval threat was ever present. In the case of war, the Buccaneer's low-level nuclear strike capability would be used to eliminate the Sverdlov-class threat.
Now, the Sverdlov was obviously well defended and obviously had radar. The attacker must therefore get close to it undetected and preferably survive. The weapon that was then becoming available, were smaller than the Hiroshima type atomic bombs, about 20 kilotons. The Buccaneer was to carry one of these, and the attack had to be made under the radar, and this was then specified as a low-level attack over 100 nautical miles at 0.85 of the speed of sound, which is about 550 knots, about 650 miles an hour. This high speed enabled the atomic bomb to be effectively thrown at the Sverdlov from about 3 miles away. What happened was, at about 97 miles, that is 3 miles to go, the radar, which of course the airplane would have to identify and locate the target, signaled the pilot to pull up, and at about 30 degrees attitude, the bomb was released. The airplane continued in a looping maneuver to roll out and escape very rapidly in a dive, and the bomb was flung the last 3 miles. It didn't have to be all that accurate because, of course, the lethal zone of an atomic bomb was pretty large. Now, this it was hoped would avoid A, detection, and B, in the last minute, they wouldn't have very much time to shoot at you. The reversionary mode for this was a rather more suicidal maneuver, which involved continuing for the last 3 miles if, for example, you had some faults in the system, and flying over the target. You pulled up into the same looping maneuver, and at about 105, 110 degrees of pitch, in other words, just over the vertical, the bomb was released. It went on up, turned around at the top, came down again, and blew up on the target. The atomic bomb, was carried in a rotary bomb bay. This gave the least aerodynamic disturbance when open, and also to some extent kept the bomb at a reasonable temperature. It could also carry 4 conventional iron bombs, 1,000-pound bombs, 2 by 2. However, we did encounter problems during development with these bombs because they started life close together, a matter of inches apart in the bomb bay, and with at high speeds, even the low disturbances that we had in this bomb bay were sufficient to make them bang together when they came out. At first sight, this seemed to be very disturbing, to have bombs banging together within a few feet of your aircraft. But in the end, after trying a number of aerodynamic fixes to get the airflow right in the bomb bay, we eliminated the problem by the simple experience of angling out the guns which fired out the bombs, and we never had the problem thereafter.
The Buccaneer could also carry a wide range of underwing stores that included 500 and 1,000-pound bombs, SNEB rocket pods, guided missiles, and the Martel air-to-surface precision tactical missile. The aircraft, however, had no self-defence capability.
In the early days, the Buccaneer was very vulnerable. We felt very naked. We had no defensive capability against a fighter. And if an enemy fighter came up and spotted you, there's nothing you could do except ask it to go away. So when we were going through the Suez Canal in HMS Victorious, I was senior pilot of the Buccaneer Squadron 801. And I thought it would be nice if we could build a dummy Sidewinder and stick it underneath the Buccaneer. So we got a whole lot of empty beer cans and welded them together, painted them white, added some fins made of cardboard, stuck it underneath the Buccaneer. The purpose of this, of course, was to get the intelligence photographers of the other side, who were no doubt hiding behind a palm tree, to get pictures of the Buccaneer and to gain the impression that we did have some defensive capability. And it worked as far as I know. Certainly the missile stayed on the Buccaneer until halfway through the canal, when Commander Eyre went to lunch, and on his way to lunch he spotted this thing, which was against all the rules and regulations, and had it removed. But I like to think that the other side got the impression that the Buccaneer had now got some self-defence capability.
On the 18th of March 1967, the Torrey Canyon, a supertanker carrying 118,000 tons of crude oil, ran aground just 16 miles off Land's End. Up to this time, the Buccaneer hadn't been used in any kind of anger, but it was now involved in Operation Sink Ship, which would ironically credit the aircraft with sinking the largest tonnage of shipping than any other aircraft before.
The problem with the Torrey Canyon was to ignite the crude oil, and crude oil needs something like a 1,000-pound bomb to burn it. It needs a weapon with a very high explosive temperature. So Buccaneers were the obvious answer, and that's what was used. And the pilots were using a very accurate system called auto DSL, and they were going for individual bulkheads in the tanker to break them open and ignite the fuel. And by and large it worked very well, and there was a minimum damage to the beaches of Cornwall.
Right from the early days, hopes had been high at Brough that the Buccaneer would be an export success. On the list of potential customers had been the US Navy and the West German Kriegsmarine squadrons. These hopes were not to be fulfilled, and the Buccaneer was probably the best British aircraft not to hit the export jackpot. The only export customer was the South African Air Force, who had an identical low-level strike requirement to the Royal Navy. The South African Buccaneers were similar to the Royal Navy's Mark IIs. Raytog retractable rockets were fitted to improve takeoff performance in the hot and high conditions of South Africa. 16 Buccaneers had been ordered and were destined for 24th Squadron at Waterkloof. In October 1965, 8 aircraft made their long delivery flight via the Canary Isles. 1 aircraft was unfortunately lost en route. Because of this, the remaining 8 were shipped to South Africa as deck cargo, carefully cocooned to protect them from the elements. In 1965, the Wilson government cancelled the TSR-2. The TSR-2 was to fulfill all the tactical, strike and reconnaissance roles of the Royal Air Force, and the cancellation came as a major blow to them. Dennis Healy, then Minister of Defence, suggested an investigation to determine whether the Buccaneer could carry out the RAF's strike requirements. 3 years later, the Ministry of Defence announced that the Buccaneer was to be ordered for the RAF. first order was for 26 aircraft, followed by a further 17. The RAF also received a total of 64 ex-Royal Navy Mark IIs. With bomb door fuel tanks fitted, the Buccaneer's radius of action would be increased to fight in all the relevant areas of the North Sea and the Mediterranean. Despite the fact that the Buccaneer came to the RAF from the Navy, the aircraft proved extremely popular with RAF crews. Gibraltar has been an important base for the Navy and Air Force, and 24 years after the RAF took delivery of its first Buccaneer, 208 Squadron from Lossiemouth arrived for their last overseas Buccaneer detachment.
Sounded like it went like clockwork on the way down.
Yeah, it did.
What were you so late off for? Was it ice on the runway or something?
No, it's just the tanker bracket.
Oh, right.
Because we'd always implant airborne about 11 o'clock, give us
Yeah.
a reasonable met brief time, but then the tanker bracket, okay,
Oh, yeah.
it's flattened down the radio problem, but
Yeah. Oh, good stuff. Well, the rock's still there.
yeah, who knows that.
Oh, it's an absolutely super airplane. My background was I started on Jaguars and then I went to the Tornado. So to come to the Buccaneer, first of all, was a little bit of a shock because I was used to modern avionics and comfortable cockpits, and to climb into this thing, which was obviously fairly old, big switches and things like that, it was a bit of a surprise. However, once you get it above 300 knots, it's an absolutely delightful airplane to fly, and it's very well suited for its role. And I've thoroughly enjoyed my time on it. I think the main thing about it is that being an old airplane, you've actually got to fly it. Tornado's a very easy airplane to fly. Flying the Buccaneer, you've got to watch it all the time. It can bite you. it's got a few vices, and you've really got to know what you're doing.
As an aircraft, marvellous machine, very steady and very solid. It has its certain idiosyncrasies, mainly in the circuit. Once you get the aircraft really moving at low level, you feel like you just want to go and ram something. It's very solid, you're riding on rails, and gives you a warm, fuzzy feeling.
Early morning, an HMS Liverpool, a Type 42 destroyer, sails out of Gibraltar Harbour. Her presence here is closely connected with that of the Buccaneers. Aboard the Liverpool are 6 student principal warfare officers, or PWOs, who will be tested to the limit in the climax of their one-year warfare course. The course provides them with experience in live firings of the vessel's 4.5-inch guns, phalanx and 20mm close-range weapons. The ship leaves a massive wake as the 2 Olympus engines power the vessel to around 30 knots. Each PWO will have to defend against inbound missiles which will be simulated by the Buccaneers. Failure could mean the end of their careers. The Buccaneer air crews put their attack plans together. The game's on.
Yeah, it's done. Actually, we're back at 11:15 local.
Director, Ezra Pauling in yellow, relax. We've got 20k, 8 gauges, 4 FS, normal 5 dollars, I do not possible. And we should be able to take the rag with that, no trouble at all. Once we're past there, once we're past 148, we've got a depth gap. Basically, if we lose engine battery, there will be jumping out. Yeah. And once we rotate, we should be able to go airborne on punch the tanks off. I'll go straight ahead anyway, and if we need to keep it going up, we'll see how we go the other side. And every time you don't like it, step out. Okay.
Park clear takeoff, social wind 300, 5 knots, center wind assigned.
Park clear takeoff.
Roger, pod correct. Visual PDC. Approach about the D9 miles.
T50!
This is Delta. Both confirmed. Further away. 3111. Out. This is Delta. Mud splash. 3111. Out.
Turret squawk 3410.
3410, we're at low level.
Sorties completed, the Buccaneers recover to base.
27 colour blue, wind 250, 3 knots.
We're just passing point Charlie inbound.
Our first one was a seagull attack, so we launched from quite a reasonably long range, well outside their radar. Their missile system will usually go out about half the range that we fire the seagull from, so we'd be very safe doing that. But once we've done that, we then fly the profile of the missile, because otherwise we'd just turn away and they'd never see anything. So we then go up to 540 knots at 100 feet and fly in as the missile would, and then at the missile the radar would pop up and start looking. We actually climb up, put the radar on, remark the ship, and then go back down to 100 feet and find out. The second one, we then went back out to 40 miles, and the second one we did was what we call a delta, which is an LGB attack. We didn't normally do it in a four-ship with the two aircraft behind with a laser designating pod, but on this one, because we just had the two, we just simulated the two bombers at the front.
Some of the aircrew on exercise in Gibraltar took part in Operation Granby in the Gulf War. Some 20 years after taking delivery of their first Buccaneer, the RAF took them into real action for the first time.
Granby was the first time the Buccaneer had been used in wartime, and it was strange that it was used in a manner that was completely different from that it was designed for. Of course, it was designed for low-level maritime strike, obviously over the sea, and we employed it in the high-level target designation over land, which is distinctly different. But again, great testimony to the airframe. It performed magnificently well. It handled well at height, and we managed to, through subtle tactics, get the pilot's eyes onto the target. Of course, the problem being that if you can't see the target, we couldn't bomb it. So the pilot was responsible primarily for sussing out the target, for talking the navigator onto it, and if necessary, for diving towards the target. And then once the navigator had seen the target through his pavespike screen, he could then take control of the pavespike head. The pilot would then return to altitude, and we would illuminate the target with laser energy. The tornadoes would then drop onto whatever we were bombing. We also designated for ourselves in the latter stages of the war, we could carry 2 paveway bombs in addition to the pavespike pod, and also self-defense if necessary of a Sidewinder air-to-air missile. Typically, however, we would always fly in a package with the tornadoes, so we would go in, we would then spike for the tornadoes, and then we would remain overhead the target to drop our bombs, designating for ourselves from a dive. So we'd tip in from as high as we could go. Then at the time we would then pickle the bombs off. The navigator would then call he was happy, and the pilot would recover, get back up to altitude, and he would then be free to maneuver the aircraft, keep his eyes open for ground launch SAMs, and the navigator would then illuminate the target with laser energy, and hopefully the bombs would hit. So we did a certain amount of that near the latter stages of the war.
Proven in war and peacetime, the Buccaneer was an essential element of Britain's maritime defences. After 30 years of service flying in tough conditions, it's time for them to stand down and let the new generation of multi-role aircraft take over.
I'm very sorry to see the Buccaneer go out of service. It had to come. It's had a wonderful innings. 40 years it's been flying for. I used to see them flying over the house occasionally. I shan't see that anymore. It's sad, but it has to happen.
It's the end of an era for the Brough factory. It is indeed perhaps the last of the Blackburn Aircraft, but without question it's the very best.
Very, very sad. The airplane has been around for a long time. A lot of people have flown it, both the Royal Navy and the Royal Air Force. And to see the last British bomber disappear, finally, everything else we're going to fly now is going to be made by several countries and things like that. So I'll be very, very sad to see it go. It's a tremendous airplane. I had great fun flying it. And it's not just going to be me, but all my squadron, plus all the Navy guys who fly it, will be very, very sad indeed.
For the air crews, the Buccaneer is the last of the true seat-of-the-pants aircraft. Buccaneer, the last of its type, the last British bomber.